52 from the SAT number 9, April 2017. And 52 says, Niklas counters Martone's proposal about the evolutionary history of red and green algae by suggesting that the something. So we're talking about Niklas and countering Martone's proposal about the evolutionary history of red and green algae. So let's just go back. This is a question that's a little bit challenging. A lot of students get this one wrong. I think the main issue with this is just really comprehending the two arguments. And I think if you do, it makes this question a little easier. So first, what we want to do is we really want to start with what does Martone say, right? Because Niklas is giving a counter argument to Martone's argument, but we want to start with what he says. So Martone's working hypothesis is that the molecular pathways producing lignin emerged long before land plants evolved from green algae back to some ancestor shared with red algae more than 1 billion years ago. So this is basically saying that the molecular pathways that allows for lignin to grow probably was shared by an ancestor long before red and green algae split. So basically, both red and green algae can produce lignin, and probably they had the same molecular pathways with a common ancestor. And then he says molecular evidence and comparisons of the biological gear the algae used to harvest light convince him that both red and green algae descend from one endosymbiotic event when a eukaryote cell engulfed the photosynthesizing cyanobacterium and gained the ability to make its own food. So then he's basically saying that he thinks that red and green algae, they descend from a single endosymbiotic event where basically we had a eukaryote cell engulf the photosynthesizing cyanobacterium, and that was the event. And then from there, the pathways for lignin production evolved, and then red and green algae split, and then we ended up with the species we have today. So Niklas, he's gonna counter that argument, and he says first, his evidence for the existence of lignin in this seaweed is strong, but then he goes on. He thinks that red and green algae evolved from separate endosymbiotic events. So that's the main issue, is that Martone thinks it was one endosymbiotic event, and Niklas thinks it was two separate ones. Then he says still the progenitors of the two algae, so the ancestors of the two algae, they may have both carried genes similar to those, etc. So I think the main issue is just, is it one endosymbiotic event or is it two? Is it separate ones? So let's look for an answer choice that matches that. A says major molecular pathways present in red and green algae must have been in place long before their evolutionary lines separated. I just don't think that this is really a point of disagreement, the molecular pathways in producing lignin. The other thing is that I think that Niklas believes the opposite, right? He believes that basically the two separate ancestors for red and green algae, each of them carried the genes capable of producing lignin, whereas it's Martone himself who thinks it was the shared ancestor who could produce lignin. And so I think this right here, this one right here would be more along the lines of what Martone views, so it would be weird for Niklas to counter with that. So A is out. B says evidence uncovered in Martone's research does not directly address the issue of when the last common ancestor of red and green algae existed. This is true, but it just doesn't. Niklas doesn't say anything about it, right? Like, you should have addressed this. Martone doesn't put any airs on about that fact that he has addressed this or solved this. It just seems kind of irrelevant. Nobody really talks about it, so we can get rid of B. C says evolutionary lines leading to the two kinds of algae, might have diverged before they acquired the ability to photosynthesize. So I think this is good because remember the main difference is two endosymbiotic events versus one endosymbiotic event. So they're basically saying Niklas thinks that the evolutionary lines would have diverged, but he mentions photosynthesis, which is like, why are we talking about that? And this is why reading both paragraphs becomes important, because we mentioned here that part of Martone's claim about this one endosymbiotic event is that basically this is when both algae acquired the ability to photosynthesize, right, during this one event. So it would actually be relevant for Niklas to say that they diverged before they acquired the ability to photosynthesize. So this is pretty good. D says the process by which C. cheilosporioides produces lignin might be different from the processes by which ancestral species of algae produced it. I don't think this is really very good, because I don't think that the passage is really talking about the difference in the production. I think, if anything, there's kind of a unity between the way that C. cheilosporioides produces lignin versus the way the ancestral species produced it. So I don't think this is a really good answer choice, and that's going to leave us with answer choice C, which is our correct choice for question 52.